So we have a test. We have a test Thursday. It is in person. So no choice but to come in. It is on labs 1 through 7, no Flask, all the previous stuff. Probably be short little things, so not all of them that short, but as opposed to some of my other programming tests where it's sort of one big scenario that you spend the whole period on. This will be a lot of little things. So it'll get more like one or two big things as we move on, but this first test is sort of more of a lot of little things. Some of those homework questions, when I gave you sort of 2 things to do, those were some old test questions. So the homework where there was this one with the tkinter and the API, and then the previous one with the function and reading the CSV. Those were both questions from a test, and that wasn't the whole test. So, but that'll give you some idea of the questions on the test. As I say, sometimes I give code and you add to it, and sometimes I might just, something might be small enough. There may be something with just some like control logic, a little bit, you know, a couple of input from the user and an if, and then get out. So there'll be that mix of things, either very short programs from scratch or editing programs. They will all be like something that you've done. You're allowed to use anything, any of my examples, anything you've written, anything you find online. You can't interact with another person. Okay. All right, so that is Thursday test in person, labs 1 through 7, lots of little things, lots of partial credit. I know that under normal circumstances, it makes sense when you're programming to just, you know, focus on that one thing and not budge from it until you get it right. And that doesn't make sense on a test. Hop all around, get all the easy points, write code that doesn't work, but comment it out and say, I think this is close, get partial credit. So it's just a slightly different version of programming than normal programming, but it's still a lot closer to real programming than what you'll see on some other people's tests. So no definitions of terms, no tracing out code, you'll be writing code. All right, but there is this sort of time scenario that makes it a little bit different than just normal coding. All right. So, again, one more time, test Thursday, labs 1 through 7, all in person. Do not, if you've not been in and you don't remember what seat, then talk to me, get here early and figure out what seat you can sit in. There's a little bit of setup, and I don't want the people who've been here under normal circumstances having to move from their normal seat. So those of you who don't want to be in the room with me, you have to be in the room with me, and don't sit in anybody else's seat. I've got new Flask material to go over, but I'll ask if there are any questions you want me to do up here. No. All right, so let's continue on our Flask and WTF. So we started last time, we started Flask with lab 8. And now we are, and then we added in 10, we started doing some forms. So we had brought in WTF and we're interacting with the user, getting information from the user. And now we're going to bring in a little bit of validation. So I downloaded the files. I'm going to open up my Visual Studio Code. I'm going to direct it to my virtual environment. Not open file, open folder. Documents for me, 341. What was it? Flask 2 is my virtual environment, VENV, there it is. And then I want to copy these files. And it was, what was it, app 4 now. And I'm going to copy that over to 341 Flask 2 VENV. I'm pasting that in there. And then let's see what we've got. So close a bunch of things. So there's app 4. And the app is usually the routes. So I've got a default route, which is going to the first route. I've got the first route, the second route. No, I'm an app. I want to be an app 4. An app 4, that makes more sense. I'm bringing in a simple form. I have a default route, which goes to the simple form. Then I have the simple form. And then the simple form, there are 2 templates. One if I'm there the first time, and one if I am if I'm responding to a submission. The form is created in this forms file. That's what we imported. We imported forms from forms. That's the name of the file without the extension py, and simple forms what we bring in from there. And keep clicking on extraneous things. So here is, there's forms. That's what I want open. Okay. So what do I have? I have Flask form. I have string field, submit field, select field, integer field, decimal field. That's where we ended before. So I had a button, that was the submit field. I had a place where you could enter some text, that was the string field. I had a drop-down list, that's the select field. And I had a place where you can enter some numbers, integers, and decimals. Now I'm bringing in some validation stuff to make sure that what the user does makes sense. So my first validator is just that something is required. So I said that the name was required. And the drop-down selects usually are sort of automatically pointing to the first choice. So I don't have to do the required kind of validation for them. That doesn't make, you can write it down, but it doesn't make sense because you're always sort of pointing at a valid choice with a drop-down select. So that is, there's nothing new there, but I put in a required validator for the name, for the hours, for the rate. So if the user doesn't fill out one of these fields, it's supposed to complain. So that's the new part. This no new ways to enter, but some validation added to them. And then, so that is, there's a simple form. And well, there's no change there so far. There will be a change later on to display a message if the validation goes wrong. But for required, there's like a default thing that the browser does. So we don't we don't need to change the input over here. And the handler doesn't change because we don't get to the handler if the form's invalid. It's just going to take us right back to the form. So that is the concept that we've said now. Otherwise, we had what we had last Thursday, except we've said that 3 of our inputs are required. So we'll see what happens if we don't fill in the data that is required. Okay, so let's see if I can. There we go. Environment, $env, flask _ app equals app4, then flask run. There's the URL, open that up. I get redirected from the default route to the simple form. And I've chosen C++ and red automatically, but the other things have these input requirement validators on it. And if I hit enter, I get some response that it's like to please fill out this form. So I'll be Betty. And now it says, please fill out the hours. So I worked 50 hours this week. Enter. Please fill out the wage. I make $15 an hour. Let's enter. And then it will move on to the page. So it is requiring that we do all those things. Let's see if we can go back. Okay. Let's look at view the page source. And there's not much different looking here. Okay, it added required. So there was in the form, there was an input, it added the attribute required, and required. So we had something on our WTF. It got sent over to that we wanted a validator, that we wanted it required. And then what it did when it generated this HTML for us, it added the required field. Okay. Questions? No. All right. So next one, more validation. Close. Okay, so now I'm going to have a length validator. So they could, if they put anything in the box, it's in terms of the name, it works. But now I'm going to say, I'm not going to worry about white space or anything like that, but I'm going to say that it has to have a certain length, that they're entering a name, the name has to have a certain length, or I'm going to say it's no good. I'm going to copy what I send you. Remember, when it comes time for you to send me things, you send me what I send you. So you might send me something from static and templates and some PYs. Don't send me the script. The first lab 8 is like mostly screen captures. After that, you send me code. Don't send me the script. Okay, and don't send bare PYs. I hope you know that by now. The email system will reject them. Okay, so I pasted that into the right spot. Let me go back to Studio, open the right thing. And let me see forms. So forms is sort of, so I added here, I'm working on the validator. So 9 is my new things I'm importing. So I just showed you input required. Now I'm adding a length requirement. Okay, and then under the Simple form, I'm entering the name. It is, so the validators is a list. So you can have more than one validation on a field. I'm going to require it. I'm going to have it at be a certain length, so on. And the length I'm saying here is has a minimum of 2 characters, a maximum of 60. And here's my message. So we didn't see my message for required. It mainly just said, there was just a default message there for required. But this message, we're going to sort of pop up and see that the length should be between 2 and 60, and then I make up some message. And my message doesn't have to match this. It could just, my message could say, hey, what are you trying to pull? It's just my message is whatever it says. But so that's the new thing. Then I've added a length validator, and that was the only change. There's no change to app 4 because that's just establishing the routes. What about simple form? Simple form, here's where I'm entering the name. And so I had a curly form.name.label. That's the thing that just says name. Here's curly form.name. That's going to make the input item in HTML. And then I said I made a span, which I made of the error class. And then I had form.names.errors join vertical bar. So if there's more than one error message that's popping up, I'm going to sort of put them together sort of as a and this is a join in Jinja. This curly bracket stuff is Jinja. And so I'm putting together any errors. I'm only going to see one error, but if I had multiple errors, I could display multiple errors. And then the rest of it looks the same. Here's the drop down for the language. Here's the drop down for the color. You don't see here what kind of thing it is, because that information was over here in the forms file. But so everything over here looks the same. I'm bringing in a language, specifying how what the user does to choose a language. That's written someplace else. But here's the color, the hours, the wage, the submit button. And again, this is about validation. So if it's not valid, nothing's going to happen on the handler, because with validation, everything happens on the form, not on the form handler. Okay, so let me Control C to put my cursor down there, Control C to stop it, and then start it again. And Control click. And let me put in some hours. I work 50 hours. I make $15 an hour. And it's just saying, please fill out this field. I didn't write that. I wrote something else, I think. But so for this message, if I don't fill in anything at all, what did I say? I said, you must enter a name. And they're saying, please fill out this field. So I'm not controlling that message. But if I enter a name, V, and just a V for V, that's not long enough by my length validation, then here is my message. Then I made a span that said the name must be between 2 and 60 characters. That is my message. So for the required, you don't see my message, but for the length, you do see my message. And now I'm going to try and remember, because that is not my style for the error message. I think I changed the style for the error message because I have an error class. Is it Control-Shift-R? Yes. So now I had my style, my CSS file, my style was cached, and I needed to get it to go beyond it being cached to see it. So here's my ugly error class style, red on orange. And then if I enter long enough and enter, I move on. So that was the length validator. So the first validator was that I require the input. It seems like I can write my own message, but I can't. But over here, then I did have a message. And what did we have? So let me look at that style just to show you that it is in there. Here's the simple style, I think it is, and here's the error code. So that's the orange background and the red writing. Okay, anything else I want to show you? Let me show you what the code behind looks like. I'm going to close it and open it fresh. And let me view the page source. So here is here's the thing. So I have a span, but it's empty right now. So when I try to submit the form and it has a mistake, then something will be written. My message will be written in the span. But right now I have the span, but it's empty. And that's what I said I wanted. Where's my simple form? I said, here's a span. And what I put in the span is the error message. And so when there are no error messages, there's nothing in the span. And then there was something in the span. Okay. And I chose the span because the span doesn't take up room. The span can be on the same line. So when I made the mistake, just entering V, why am I, I'm hitting Control V instead of capital V. If I just had V and I tried to put it in, I need hours 50, I need a wage 15. Now there's some other character in there, seems. No. It's moving on, so why did that? Okay, there's the error message now popping up when I don't have the length val. Okay. So that was example 2. So example 1 was require the input. Example 2 was add a length validator. Number 3 is I have some numbers and I'm going to specify a range of numbers. So copy this. Paste it in, documents 341, Flask 2, VE and V. Okay, so let's see, let's start over in forms. That's where the changes occur. That's where they start out. Here are my validators. That's the topic of the day. Input required. We've seen now length. We've seen require. Number range. That's the new one. So we've seen the input required validator. We've seen the length validator. We're adding a number range validator. The name had the length validator. The hours and the wage are going to have the number range validator. So I'm going to say that the hours are going to be between 0 and 85 hours. And if they are not inside that, I'm going to say it's not a valid number of hours. And then the wage, I'm going to say between $7.50 for a minimum and $200 for a maximum. And I'm going to say that that's not a valid wage. So that's what I'm validating, that the number appears in the range. And here's my message to display if it doesn't. The app doesn't change because that's just the routes. And the handler doesn't change because this is an error message that happens before I get to the handler. So the only other thing that can change is the simple form. And what did I change? I changed the hours and the wage, and I'm just adding in that there could be errors. So I did my same span to display some error message for the hours and a span to display an error message for the wage. And I put it into my error class, so it'll be that lovely orange with red writing. Let's stop what was running previously, start it up again. Okay, here we are. So who am I? Fred. I'll be Fred. Fred likes plain text, and Fred likes green, and Fred worked minus 10 hours and makes $3 an hour. Neither of those was valid. You can't work negative hours. What if you worked 150 hours? That's also not valid. If you worked 60 hours, that was valid. If your wage was 25 an hour, that worked and you moved on. If your wage was 3, that didn't work. We saw that 25 worked. That was in range. If you make $300 an hour, it doesn't work. But if you make $30 an hour, that works. Okay, so there was the input required validator. There was the length validator for strings. There was the number range validator for numbers. One more game to play. One more game to play today. I'm going to split some information. So I'm going to try to send 2 pieces of information over and split it up, and then have sort of get two pieces of information for the price of 1. And that I'm going to work in Jinja. I could do my work in Python. I try to keep the Python minimal and do a bunch of Jinja, but I don't know. That might be making it hard. So in extract. Copy 341 flask 2 V and V, paste. And let's see what changes. Let's start in forms. And here's where I added the double thing. So I have red and I have a code for red. So I'm sort of, this counts in terms of what is sent as one piece of information, but there's a delimiter. And so if once I get that piece of information to its destination, then I can split it and it can be like I passed two pieces of information. Okay, so that is the new game. So there's a string field where they enter their name. It is, I must have it, and it must be between 2 and 60 characters. Here's my submit button. Submit button really belongs at the bottom, and it will be on the simple form. But as I was building up here, it used to be that I just had the name and the button. So that's why it's second. The order doesn't matter over here. Here's my language. I have the choices in a drop-down list are a list of tuples, and it's what the user sees and what you pass behind scenes. And here for the color, I have again a list of tuples, and what I'm passing behind the scene I've made more complicated by adding two parts with a delimiter between them. I have hours, which the input is required, and there's a number range. I have a wage, which the input is required, and there's a number range. So here's the new part now. What I'm passing behind the scenes is more complicated and has a delimiter. There's nothing new in app 4. That's mainly just the routes. There's not much done in the simple form because I'm just passing a piece of information. That can change. What's going to change this time is the handler. And it was the color that was different. So here's the color. And I'm taking my color, which had the name of a color and the hex code of a color. And there was a vertical bar in between. And so I'm splitting them. Here is the Jinja for splitting that string up. And I said, here's my thing, result color, and I'm going to split it. And then I said, here are the two things I'm going to get out of it. I'm going to get the color name and the hex code for the color. And then I can display them separately. So that's a way to sort of pass, I'll call it multiple pieces of information, or more complicated information, and then parsing it. Okay. So Control C, start it up again. I have, let me show you the page, the view source. Here's my drop down. Here's my drop down for the colors. Here are the values. What you pass behind the scenes is the more complicated thing with the vertical bar delimiter. I'm going to pick Fred, Python, blue, 45 hours, $10 an hour, and the blue and the code for blue are going to be separated when I get over to the handler. So I said, here's the blue, using the blue as a color, but here is the word blue and the hex code for blue. So I've split them up. And that was here. And that's what I had to show you today, validation and splitting in Jinja. And here is the lab. And then I will break for questions. So it's wooden frames again. If you know me, this is one of my examples. What I want to do there. So you're going to make a form. They're going to enter a name. It should be between 4 and 60 characters. They're going to enter a width of a frame and a length of a frame. It should be more than 8 and less than 96. So some number validation there. There should be a drop down saying what kind of a frame it is, and then some factor in how to determine the price of the frame, and then send over the information. And if it's valid, if they've entered a long enough name, if they've entered a width, a height in the right range, then you'll take the width and the height and the frame choice, and you'll split the frame choice so that you'll get this factor out of it, and then you'll calculate the price, and then you'll display the width and the height and the type of frame and the cost. So, any questions for the recording before I stop? No.